Conversations on Dance is generously made possible by Yumiko. Yumiko creates handmade dancewear for dancers by dancers, and for years has been a favorite of students and professionals alike. Recently, we had the opportunity to chat with the founder of this legendary brand, Yumiko Takashima, and hear more about her career as a professional dancer, how she created her first leotard, and how she built the company into the brand we love today. Tune in now to hear her speak with us in episode 153. And visit yumiko.com to browse their incredible catalog of customizable dancewear and ready-to-wear styles.
Ballet Hispánico, America's leading Latino dance organization, returns to the Apollo Theater on November 22nd and 23rd to celebrate the power of the Latina voice with works by all-female choreographers. This season includes the world premiere of Anabel Lopez Ochoa's Tiburones, as well as the return of Nasi by Andrea Miller and Michelle Manzanales con Brazos Abiertos. Tickets begin at $13.50 and are available by phone at 800-745-3000 or online at www.apollotheater.org.
I'm Rebecca King Ferraro.
And I'm Michael Breeden, and you're listening to Conversations on Dance. Today on Conversations on Dance, we are joined by Artistic Director of Ballet Hispánico, Eduardo Vilaro. Eduardo recounts his early years adjusting to New York City life as a Cuban immigrant, what it was like building his first company from the ground up, and how Ballet Hispánico has carved out an identity for itself that is unique in the dance world.
Eduardo, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with us. We're really excited to speak with you about your career and also the upcoming Ballet Hispánico performances at the Apollo. So thank you for your time.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for asking me.
So, Eduardo, you were born in Cuba, and at just 5 years old, you came to the United States with your parents to seek political asylum. What do you remember about this time, and what was it like to defect during the second wave of refugee migration from Cuba?
Yeah, I remember getting on the plane. I remember it was raining that day. I remember looking out the window and kind of understanding that I might never be back home because that's what I was hearing from the adults. I remember the energy of my parents' sorrow. So that leaving there certainly. And then I do, there was a lot of interesting, of course, for a young child to be put in a new space. Here you were we didn't go to Florida. We were in Florida for like a couple of days before we were in New York. So, my big exploration was New York City. So, the thrill of your first snowfall for someone who for 5 years only knew tropical weather. Right. That was a lot of fun. And just it was a moment of such discovery, but also of a lot of challenges.
Yeah.
A lot of those challenges were about language.
Right. I was just going to ask that. What was that like? I mean, for you as a young child, of course, you adapt so quickly to new languages. But what was that like for your family and your parents also having to, coming here, not speaking any English and having to make a go of it and raise a family?
I think it's remarkable, and I do know that younger children learn language easier. We all know that. I think there should be a study about the way the immigrant mind kind of switches on to that or connects to that ability in a certain way. It might be wired differently, but there are a lot of people that come and somehow or other learn the language, whether it's, sounds like pig Latin to some people or they are able to communicate. And I think that's a very immigrant kind of learned trait, but they learned the best they could. My father went back to school because he was an engineer and he needed to transfer his engineering degree to an American degree. So he was luckier certain than my mother. My mother was, it was all about the work, right? So she actually learned English in that hardcore, learn it now, do or die
Right.
For me, it was, and it's not all the same because if you hear my two, I'm the middle child. um, and if you hear all of us speak, we have very different accents, and we have a different command of the language, which is not, it's not quantitative at all. It's just interesting the way the mind works. I think it's more about that.
Right.
So for me, it was, I remember, getting hit with the ruler at the nun. We went to a parochial school.
Oh, wow.
The nun not knowing certain things. The pressure, in my mind switched to, you better learn this now or you won't survive.
Right.
So I had from the beginning I didn't want to get hit again. I had these external factors that really drove me, one, to learn English, two, to get rid of my accent, and then three, later on, to come back to Spanish and have also no accent in Spanish. It's a very interesting thing when people hear me speak Spanish. They're like, "Where are you from?"
Right.
Well, because Cubans have a very specific accent too. We know because we were in Miami for so many years.
No, you know. Yeah, they have, and I can fall into it. I'm actually, so for me, I became a very much a parrot, a mimic with accents. So that clicked on in my brain, and my capacity to pick up things. So I started picking up languages. So and accents in languages. So if I say a few words in French, and everybody's like, "Wow." So that was, and that in high school I took Latin also because I knew that would help me. So languages were an interesting part of my life while I was in school.
So you spoke about New York being a place of discovery for you. What point did arts and dance become a part of that discovery?
So I was in a parochial school, like I said, 8th grade, a new teacher came into, we had only one 8th grade class. We were it. Mm-hmm. And we had a new teacher who happened to have been an actor and a director. And for the first time ever, as a final end of year celebration, we did a musical. Oh. And it was in a Catholic school. It was great. Little did I know that there were tons of Catholic schools doing musicals everywhere. And we did You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown, and I got the role of Linus. Mm-hmm. And Linus dances with his blanket. And that was it. I was two things I remember. I had to choreograph the work, the solo. Mm-hmm. I decided to there were stairs that led from the stage to the audience. I decided my dance would go down those stairs, dance amongst the audience, and come back up. And the thrill, I was hooked. The bug hit me. I wanted to dance. I wanted to sing. I wanted to be on stage.
Right.
So without really any formal dance training, your first kind of foray into this was actually kind of choreography. Is that right?
Oh, no. Yes. It set me up for later on my choreography.
Yeah. Right. Wow, that's so interesting.
So really, from there,
it was my Billy Elliot story. Because you're a Cuban coming to the new country, you need to grow up to be a corporate professional, a doctor, a lawyer. The whole work. You guys know this. So I started trying to find out where I can take class. How do I become this thing? I got into a Catholic prep school on scholarship. And so it was then that I started, really branching out into the New York City. So I started taking martial arts class, capoeira, which has a dance form. And next door, there was a ballet class. Mm-hmm. So I started sneaking into the ballet class. And that was on 53rd Street, mm-hmm. Right by, downtown. It was, Asher and Simpson had their studios up on top, this was 70 something. Oh my God, I can't wait. I can't believe it feels so close and yet so. so I started taking class, and I just got better. And, you know, through both of those classes, I was introduced to other people. And then you know how it gets. So where do I go here? Where do I go there? Where do I go here? Then all of a sudden, you know, I'm in junior year of high school, and I'm auditioning for Ailey for their summer program. And I get into Ailey. And, you know, and I'm still hiding all of this from my family. I'm dancing summer program here and there, doing these little gigs. You know, when you're a male, you're tall, you can lift, you're good, you're in.
Yeah.
So I you know, it was like a quick learning of what do you need to do. And then, you know, I went to the Martha Graham School during my senior year, and I was about to graduate. I came to Ballet Hispánico. I had never heard of Ballet Hispánico, only the big names, ABT, New York City, Ailey, you know, all the big names. And then I discovered Ballet Hispánico, took a class, and Tina comes after me right after. She's like, young man, I have a job for you. And I was like, okay, I can. I'm in school. And she called my director, Norman Walker, and said, I want to give this young man a job right now. They settled on something, and which led me for a year and almost 2 years of night school.
Mm-hmm.
So that was it. Do you need more info on the New York City? Did I answer your question? I'm so sorry.
No, that was great.
It seems, I mean, I can't imagine how you were balancing all those things at once, you know, trying to manage your education while dancing. That's something that I feel like has only become more commonplace in, I'd say, even the past 10 years. You know, we think about even when Rebecca and I were coming in to company life, it was sort of frowned upon to finish your education, or, you know, there was an idea that maybe you weren't as dedicated, but you were doing it anyway. You were doing all of it. You were doing all the things.
Yeah. What I think that has to do with the immigrant syndrome. That you're just doing because you want to do and you have to do. I never once did I question why. You know, I'm not going to stay here and question. This is what I want to do. So it's like you have to do it. So if you want to do it, you have to do it. I got myself into school. My parents could not afford the school I went to for high school. I got to Adelphi University with a scholarship. Parents could, and that was when I had to come out as a dancer first. Dancer to my family and say, I'm going to college. I'm the first one to go to college in my family.
Wow.
And I'm going for dance. And that was ruinous for my father's relationship with me, but great for my mother and I. So yeah, it was kind of like do or die, right? And, you know, I grew up in the Bronx, so I needed to find an outlet also. I mean, I grew up you guys are much younger than I am. I grew up in the 70s in the Bronx. New York was burning, literally and figuratively. We were coming into a world where manufacturing jobs had left the city, so there was an outpour into the suburbs, and there were blocks and blocks of just hell. There were, you know, empty buildings. The crack epidemic. And so for me, it was another way of finding that American dream, like really just pressed upon us. And I say to people, you know, for me, dance saved my life because I know what happened to my friends that in the hood that I lived with. I know who survived and who didn't. So it was I'm just saying this because I think it was also a survival tactic.
Yeah. I don't want to get into anything like maybe that's like too personal, but I find this really interesting that maybe your parents weren't really keen on you dancing because, of course, in Cuba, dance has such a rich history in dance. Is there a specific reason why they really didn't want that for you? Do they really want you to go in a more professional route with your future career?
Oh, this is a complex question. I got to give you context. So
okay.
The Cuba really didn't start on the ballet trend until after my generation. So one of the things that Alicia Alonso did was place dance as a tool of the new government, of socialism, of communism. She placed it. She went to Fidel Castro and said, "This is a way of bringing the people together and giving them your values as well as the values of dance."
Right.
Right.
She was brilliant in that.
Hmm.
So ballet became weaponized politically. I mean, it's weaponized politically, period, in many different ways. But for Cubans, and that didn't happen until after 1959.
Hmm. Oh, interesting.
What we had in Cuba before was, it was a very imperialistic society. It was a very, the fine arts were only for the very wealthy.
Mm-hmm.
There weren't the schools of the Cuban ballet that are now. So it was very rare to get into something. Folks sent their children away, but there was a love of folklore. So the Latin style dances, mambo, salsa, all that African based work was folkloric. So it was part of you could dance that, but you didn't think it was a career. And people were looked down upon, those people who were the Tropicana ladies and gentlemen. Right. So it wasn't like it is now. It's like, it's like a dignitary when you're a ballet dancer from the Cuban National Ballet.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Very different world.
That's
Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. That's interesting. I didn't know that.
The context. Yeah, no, Cubans might say, and here's where from my Cuban brothers and sisters, they might say, oh, we always had this passion for it. No, let's get real. So yeah. And so then they had this, they just didn't understand the ballet world or the dance world.
Right. That's interesting.
I hope that answered your question.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's great. So what then was your time as a professional dancer initially like? What were you finding your your sort of dream was coming true, but what was the reality like for you?
Oh my gosh, that's such a great question. I haven't been asked that. I think that it was another time. We were coming out of the NEA being very generous about touring. So when we toured a lot with Ballet Hispánico.
Mm-hmm.
It was a different time that you can really live in New York. It was more affordable, so you can eke out a living as far as rent, and then you can still do that, but it seemed like there were more mom and pop shops, and there were more things that were a little bit more affordable that you can manage to feel like you were living well as an artist. I felt anyway.
Right. Yeah.
Right. I mean, right now it's like in New York, it's like living in a big mall almost. Everything high end, right? A high end mall.
Mm-hmm.
So it was, so I didn't feel like I had the stress that I see my dancers have and some other artists have today.
Right.
Interesting.
It's a different stress. Still similar, but really different. I mean, because the onset of technology also says you are entitled to all of this, which which begets a lot of different things, right? We were like, I don't know what I'm entitled to. I just want to dance.
Right. How many weeks of work did the company have back then? So it wasn't a full-time job. You were still definitely making ends meet elsewhere.
My God. So here's the fun thing. I mean, I still had that, like the residue of like my older generation before us, who were doing nightclub stints and doing that. There was still a little bit of that. Mm-hmm. So I did all kinds of things. I worked for an entertainment company that did bar mitzvahs and weddings and corporate parties where we learned all kinds of musical numbers, danced on tables, got my ass kicked a lot. At that time there was no Me Too movement for anybody. So that was a problem as well. But anyway, so I was living in this really interesting world of being able to participate in many different, and I think it still happens, less, it's more formal now, let me put it that way. Mm-hmm. Right? you're really focusing on who you want to work with and where you want to work.
Right.
So for me, it was catch as you can. So I did that. I did some musicals. I worked with the Graham Second Company for a while because they needed some men.
Mhm.
So they needed. And so, of course, I was was introduced to the world of Nutcrackers.
That sounds appropriate.
It's full of work. I either doing all kinds of different roles.
Mhm.
I got just so to be clear, it was during the time, I think my real formal ballet training, classical ballet training, were with the teachers from Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo that were at Adelphi University. That's when I really started. And then after I left, I did David Howard. I did all the teachers that were around at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
So that's why I was able to get into Ballet Hispánico, because you needed that training. You couldn't just be a Latin dancer.
Right.
So that's why I was able to be very eclectic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Did I answer your question?
That's great. Yeah. When you were working at Ballet Hispánico, you were already starting to explore other avenues and that dance involves, like teaching at the company school and assisting Tina Ramirez in the creation of dance education residencies. Was this again, like kind of like you've been saying since the beginning of the interview, like sort of immigrant syndrome, you called it, where you just like, I have to do everything. I got to stay on top of everything. Was that always, and then you continue to pursue a master's?
Yeah.
It's like, were you always just hungry for more information and more skill sets?
Yes, always hungry for more information, always. But there was another, like I say, the immigrant mind switch to learning language. There was a dance switch. Once I really started living dance takes hold of you, and you are naturally an educator because people are interested in stepping into your world. And so, this is what I found. I found that I wanted to share my world as an artist and also culturally, because I was with Ballet Hispánico. So for us here at Ballet Hispánico, the two go hand in hand. So when we class, we're teaching about the love of the art, the spaces it can create for you, but then it also creates a dialogue for culture. And so that I was very interested in that. And I think people forget that all art develops dialogues for not only just the word culture, just society, period. And so I was very moved by being a teacher. So I went into it, and then Tina saw that, and this is how Tina worked. She was like, I have this this great program that I want to do, and it's taking kids at that time again in temporary shelters and giving them lessons during the holidays. And I said, oh, that's great. I'd love to teach. She's like, no, you're going to run it. Okay. Kickball change. Pot of parade. We're done. Right?
How cute. That's so nice. Is that something that you continue now with Ballet Hispánico? Does that like continue to be a priority for you? Not to jump too far ahead of things, but.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It is the mantra that I think has helped me take the company into a bigger arena, and has helped me change that idea of what are we saying to the world? Who are we teaching? How are we inspiring? And how are we giving access to young people that might not have the ability like I did? I fell into the ability to have dance, to have arts. I'm lucky.
Right.
So after you left Ballet Hispánico, after more than a decade with the company, you went to Chicago and pursued your master's degree. And right after that, you founded your own dance company. So can you tell us a little bit about that? And was that all creating your own company always kind of in the cards for you? Was that always your plan?
I don't think it was my plan. My thing was that I had been here a decade, and like everyone, you have your mentors and you love them, but you also think about, well, I don't I don't know if this is the right message, or this is not the message I would send.
Right.
So I was done. I was kind of, Ballet Hispánico at that time was fun. We were in another world, the world that was asking us to be iconographic, right? And to kind of play with the stereotypes still. It was a world where our art, our Latina art was looked upon as what we left behind, not who we were here. So I was growing into my own identity, into my own self by the time I was ready to go. And I was like, I need to go back into studying. I need to go back to school, because school is a place of retrospection as well, and introspection. So I said, I'm going to go back to school, and then I'll figure it out. And so I was in Chicago, and I wanted to go away from, even though I had toured with the company and seen other places, I wanted to live in another city in America to get that sense. So I chose Chicago.
Mm-hmm. You had only ever lived in New York, right? At that point?
Only ever lived in New York. Only. So I'm a New Yorker through and through. So I went to school in 2 years. They hired me. The dance center there hired me while I was in school, and I actually started running there. I was the head of their ballet program, because they really needed it.
That's amazing.
So I did that for 2-3 years. And then I said, this town, things come into place. They had a beautiful Latino theater company that burned. They had their own home. It burned down to the ground, and it didn't resuscitate. And I was like, there's such a big Latino community. They're not being served. I should do something. So, and I was doing my own choreography by then, and putting it up in certain festivals. And so I said, you know what? I think we need a company. And I started the company from zilch.
Wow.
What was your process there? What was step one of 500 building a company? What was step one?
Step one, research, right? Get in front of people, research. What do I need? Okay, 501c3 status. Who do I need? I need a partner in crime. I had a few people who were interested from the Latino community. Let's get together, keep talking. So organize, orchestrate, and cultivate. I started from nothing and got in front of, there were a few things that happened. The Dance Center, Columbia College, Bonnie Brooks came in. Bonnie Brooks is a very well-known dance advocate in the dance world, much more in the contemporary world. So you may not know her in the classical world, but she came on as chair there. She heard that I was in town. She knew who I was. She was like, "What are you doing here? Let's go." And so we became, her and some other people became a force that started bringing on more funding for the dance community there. So there was this renaissance happening of dance in Chicago, and I was part of the mix, and so was my company.
Right.
So great.
Yeah, it was great. And so my chops, immediately it was, learn on the job. This is a funder meeting. This is what you say and you don't say. This is, you're listening, you're taking in. You get, someone asks you to be on the Council of Business and Arts. You just say yes.
Right.
And you learn it and you hear, and, you have your education to fall back on. So you have, I'm thrilled that I went to a prep school. It teaches you corporate manners, which is helpful. Right? It's helpful.
Yeah, certainly.
For an artist. Go ahead.
So you spent then 10 years in Chicago doing this before you would return to Ballet Hispánico to become its second artistic director. As dancers ourselves who have been through the process of a company changing over artistic directors, we know how beneficial it can be when you're looking at candidates to see someone who's already run a company for 10 years and built one from the ground up. So how did this opportunity come about for you to return to Ballet Hispánico, and how much of your experience in Chicago do you feel like really contributed to you being able to lead the organization?
All right. Context. So 10 years, everything was going really well. We were touring. We were even touring internationally.
Wow.
For a
Wow.
10-year-old company out of the blue. I mean, I'm sorry that the company's not around anymore, but it was really doing wonderful work. So again, the stars aligned. I had met my partner who is from Kentucky.
Me.
So, like you, not too far from Lex. He's from Somerset.
Oh, wow.
And when we met, we told each other, and we were on it. And we weren't spring chickens anymore. We both turned to each other at one point and said we want to have children, and we set our stars on that. And by that time, when Ballet Hispánico reached out, we had a under 1-year-old baby boy, who. So there were things happening to me. My family here was kind of calling to me, as in my family members. It takes a village to raise a child.
Right.
So I guess there were. So I just give you context. So for what I'm going to say next.
Right.
So Ballet Hispánico called me and they were like, so the headhunter. So you've done such a great job of building a company. So we're wondering if you know anyone who might be interested in taking over for Tina. I'm like, me.
They must have thought you wouldn't want to leave your baby, I'm sure.
Yeah, tactics. They did. They were very honorable about that. And we had a long conversation, and I said, so ultimately, are you asking me if I would be interested in? And they said yes. And I said, okay, let me get back to you. And then I sat down with my husband and said, let's talk about this. By this time, it was hard to leave Luna. But the thing about Luna Negra was that, and what you learn, and I think what helps me here at Ballet Hispánico, is that once a board comes into play, once a city and funding is tied to a structure that is both political and social, you need to step away and understand that it's not yours anymore.
Right.
First 5 years, it was mine, truly mine. But I was not making certain decisions anymore. Artistically, yes. So an artist, it's one of those things that you need to understand, and people will fight me on this. But I think it's really good for me here because I know my place at Ballet Hispánico very well.
Right. Right. So what were some of the initial challenges of taking over the helm of Ballet Hispánico? Did you have certain goals and changes that you were trying to implement right away?
Yeah. My whole thing was to bring Ballet Hispánico to the new world, to the new generation. Ballet Hispánico was not speaking the language that we now speak. And I needed to do it first with the work.
Yeah, when you talk about language, do you mean like the style that the dancers were doing? What kind of, the aesthetic you mentioned, or was it more like the choreography that was being done?
All of the above. So the choreography, the aesthetic of the dancer, and how we spoke about ourselves.
Right.
I mean, that's a big ship. That's a big Titanic to turn.
So what changes did you want to make there?
Well, I mean, I came in and, is this an honest space or a space that I need to be careful?
I mean, it's up to you.
I think honest and safe.
But we appreciate honesty. So
the dancers were not at the artistic and technical level that I felt was necessary for the work that I was bringing in.
Right. No, I mean, that happens a lot. Yeah.
So I had to help them. And sometimes they didn't want to be helped. And that would mean that we needed to part ways.
I mean, this is what happens, right? Again, it's like going back to Michael and I have been there when there's a shift in a director, as much as you can want, and I'm sure you want it as a director, you don't want to go in and tear everything apart. And, and dancers who've been there for a long time, it's always just puts you in such a difficult position because you have a vision, you have a plan, you're a fresh mind, a fresh voice, and then how do you navigate the changes that you need to make and do it, frankly, like humanely? I'm sure it's a difficult place to be in.
Yeah, I think we could have a whole conversation on director transition.
Totally.
I think that Yeah, I think companies forget that the transition affects everyone,
Yes.
and that you need to take everyone on board with you. And so the dancers need their own conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And I did that at Luna. I mean, we were very when it was time to move things around. I mean, everyone, all stakeholders need to be part of a transition. It can't be a secret, held up on high thing.
Right.
Yes, or
Well,
else
Sorry.
you'll have people getting hurt. Go ahead.
At Luna, this is interesting because now you were leaving Luna of your own free will. You were, planning to go to Ballet Hispánico, and of course you wanted, I imagine, the best for the company. So you probably participated in that transition. As we know, sometimes when directors leave, it might not be on their terms, so they don't participate in it. How do you feel like you played a part in Luna's transition to try to set that up? Maybe in a way that you wish you could have had.
It's hard because I was the boyfriend that was breaking up, right?
Right.
So when you're kind of, you're the bad guy in a lot of ways to everyone. And so, however much you talk, there's always that, but you're leaving me.
Right.
So I had to be very honest about why I was leaving, and that I wanted to, I'll be, again, an honest space. I wanted to connect to Luna and Ballet Hispánico. I thought that we could play a brother-sister role in this because there was a bigger message to bring to our communities about our culture.
Right.
And there was talk early on that we can fuse both companies, or at least have a satellite kind of situation.
Right.
But then you have to deal with something called a board of directors.
Right.
And Luna's board was very jealous, and they were like, no. And they shut me out totally. They were like, no, we're going to take care of this.
I mean, I can't think of any time that we've had a director on. Well, I mean, an honest director. Balanchine, for instance, famously hated his board.
Yeah.
So it's boards seem to be necessary evil that we have to work around to achieve the artistic goals that we have.
Yeah, but I think I think I was lucky coming into Ballet Hispánico because the transition offered me the opportunity to be very honest with this board about what I was looking for and what they were getting. And I remind them. So you brought me in. Let's be clear that here are my goals. Right now, they're happy. They're like, wow, you really hit all. I mean, this is exactly what we wanted. And I said, okay, but there's the future. So here's where we're going now. So it's a conversation, right? I hate to say it, but it's a constant, very honest, transparent conversation with all stakeholders at all times.
It has to be, right? And I know, like, sometimes it can also be, I think if you don't communicate with the board, again, it's not like I've ever had this position or anything, but just looking from the outside, it seems like if there isn't that conversation with the board to help them understand the artistic side of it, that's when it really gets kind of, because these are all business people, right, that are on the board. They're not looking at it from the artistic place you are. So you're also having to educate them, if you will, and kind of show them the ins and outs and prove your case. And then and obviously you have, if you've made these changes and they see the results, then they are trusting of you.
Right. And for me, it was much more, there's always one person. I think it was more the board chair at that time at Luna than the whole board. So let me be honest about that, because they were great people. They still are great people.
Right.
And
there's
they
always one.
There's always one.
Well, let's shift gears for a second to get into what what's really spurred this interview in the first place, what we're excited about, which is the November 22nd and 23rd shows that Ballet Hispánico will be performing at the Apollo Theater in New York City, including a world premiere by podcast Conversations on Dance favorite, Annabelle Lopez Ochoa. So can you tell us a little bit about this program and specifically how Annabelle's work came to be a part of it?
Yeah, well, this is our second installation of an all Latina program. We started the program 3 years, almost 4 years ago. And I mean, we're still touring with it. People really loved it. And Annabelle was part of that. She created a work titled Línea Recta, which has flamenco overtones, and it's about the fusion of flamenco and contemporary dance, which is very important to us because Ballet Hispánico was founded on by a flamenco dancer. Tina was a flamenco dancer, a Spanish. So she did it's a beautiful work. So she did that. Then we had Michelle Manzanales, who is a Mexican-American choreographer, who did this beautiful work about identity and not being enough of American and not being enough Mexican. And then I asked Tania Perez Salas, who is a contemporary choreographer in Mexico, to take one of her pieces called Tres Catorce Dieciséis, which is the number pi. So I had one work that was reminiscent of the past, one work that spoke about the issues of identity now, and then one work that said, look, I don't even have to talk about my culture. I'm Mexican. I'm going to do that. It has nothing to do with my culture, but everything to do with my artistic vision.
Right.
And those are three very important things to say when you're a cultural organization.
Mm-hmm. Were any of these pieces in Vail? Because we were so bummed that we missed you guys when you were in Vail.
Oh, yes, they were.
Oh, because we heard the best things. People were just thrilled. Like, everyone was letting us know, you guys missed Ballet Hispánico. They were so great. We were very bummed, but they loved you.
Hopefully next year or next time you guys are out there, we'll all have some crossover.
Yeah, I hope so.
Really love that. I think what you're doing, this podcast, this is great. People need to hear. They see us more than they hear us.
Totally. And people will tell us that too, which, I guess is a good thing that they're finding it out. But people will say, I had no idea dancers were so well spoken. It's like, well, duh. But I'm glad that we're able to kind of shine the light on that. I'm sorry I interrupted you about what's happening next with your next program.
This next edition of our All Latina program has Con Brazos Abiertos, which is the Mexican-American dance, mixed with a work by Andrea Miller called Nací, which speaks about I'm very interested in the intersection of diasporas in the Hispanic diaspora. And so her work is about the Sephardic influence in the Spanish world.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
It's really a beautiful work. She comes from the Ohad Naharin tradition, so it's very guttural. And then it's Annabelle's Tiburones. So you know what tiburones means, right? It means sharks.
I didn't want to say it. I was like, I have written down here the name of her ballet, but I'm not going to say it because I know I'm going to mispronounce it.
So I'm just going to lay that there. And so the piece about the external gaze and how people want to box you into a cultural iconic, and how this new generation is just rebelling against that. And she's really, we started with the idea, I'm going to be I can be honest. We started with the idea of, taking the West Side Story sharks and just giving a look at here's the reality of the sharks today, and their gender fluidity. There is voguing movements. There is jazzy move. There is Latin movements. We are Latin. We come as immigrants. We fuse and we become something else. We're not, a one choreographer kind of or movement kind of gang, let's say. And so we started on that road and using some aspects of West Side Story, and we got our hands slapped.
Uh-oh.
So it's okay that West Side Story appropriated so much from the Latino community, but because of copyright issues, you can't appropriate your own culture.
Wow, that's insane.
Eso. And I hope that comes. So it was a very interesting thing. So we had to, that forced her to look at the work and say, okay, fine. But there's still the work stands on its own, and it does.
I think that's interesting because I feel like there have been several other issues throughout cultural appropriation is something that is being discussed at pop culture magazines and outlets a lot more frequently these days. You have something like Ariana Grande suing, what was it, Forever 21 for using her image and likeness in certain ways, but then you have other people coming out and saying, well, she stole this from someone on RuPaul or a black performer or these. So I think that's really interesting, and that's very
it's like who did it
moment.
First? Yeah, come on. Wow, that's really insane.
And with all respect, cultural appropriation is a tool of white supremacy.
Yes.
Right. I mean, I talk about this with my husband all the time. And so it is a tool that in the dance world, women have had to deal with for a long time. It is that I'm telling you what to do all the time. I'm manipulating you. I can take from what you have. And it's a hard thing. It's a hard thing we have to do because there are all these structures that are in place that we forget are there because we move in such fluidity, and we love each other as artists. We don't think, oh, I'm doing this to you. We're working we know what it is to sweat together in a room. But yet these structures really do push into us in ways that we forget. And so when Ariana Grande says something like that, she's coming from a very particular place that she does not even realize.
Right.
Because she's already done the damage before. So she has no awareness. And so I think that movements that are happening now, like Me Too and Black Lives Matter, and it's about recognition so that we can move forward. I went in deep. I'm so sorry.
I like that.
No,
that's great.
Well, I mean, obviously the context of all these pieces that you're doing are meant to go deep and meant to make you think. So what kind of conversations do you have with these choreographers when you bring them in as to what kind of conversation you would like to see happen? Or do they kind of bring ideas to you? How does that process work?
Yeah, it usually is that they both. So when a choreographer comes or when I'm interested, my first question is, so what do you want to say about your culture or your identity? What haven't you said that you really want to say? And then we start talking about how it fits into the Ballet Hispánico canon of work, right? And usually they come up and like, oh my gosh. So with Annabelle, I brought her the idea and I was like, look, I've been dying to do a work about the sharks. And then she starts thinking, and then we start having this beautiful conversation, which we're still having today as the piece is in previews. And, I love when the choreographer, I think that the role of an artistic director is to help. There's a little bit of dramaturgy in it. There's a little bit of just to say, is this really what you want? And how can I support the work? You can't just throw a choreographer in a room and say, do what you want, because then you have to be able to turn to your board if it doesn't work and say, this is why it was important to do.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
But that old model of the dance master or the artistic director just, okay, I'm going to choose this one, because this is, they're really trending and this is the choreographer of du jour. And this one, that is dangerous.
Right. It needs to say something that's true to the company's personal mission and identity, rather than
identity, because the dancers have helped make that identity in the company.
Right.
Right. So true. I love it.
So when I bring someone in, I have. Yeah, as you can tell, I love to talk, right?
Same.
So I sit with my dancers and say, do you know what you're doing? Do you know why we're doing this? And they ask me, and the interchange, the ability to have that exchange with dancers, with choreographers and dancers to choreographers is essential for this kind of work.
Right.
It might not be for rubies, but maybe it should be.
So for this coming program, for our last question, on November 22nd, 23rd, what the program you'll be performing at the Apollo, what are you hoping that the audience takes away from, I guess, what the programming is and what the organization stands for?
I want them always to go, wow. Ballet Hispánico is leading this dialogue. This is amazing. Right. I want to come see again. I want to learn more about the diversity and the diaspora of this culture. I want them to be surprised. I like when someone says, "Oh, pero eso no, that wasn't too Latino." And then ask why, and what are your what is the structure that's keeping you from thinking beyond something that's been handed down to you? So I'm interested in really being really catapulting a dialogue about culture and dance.
I think that's great. I wish I could be there for the shows. Maybe Michael will be able to, because New York.
Now I'm hooked. I'm turning up.
Yeah.
I'll be there.
Are you coming? Are you both in New York?
I'm in New York.
I'm in Florida, so I won't be there, unfortunately, but I'm so intrigued, and I really hope that I can see Ballet Hispánico in the future, because it just sounds like you're doing such wonderful work, and we've heard nothing but wonderful things.
Oh, thank you. We were in South Miami-Dade. I wish I would have known. I would have invited you.
Oh my gosh, when?
We were there last year with this ladies program.
Oh, dang. Oh, okay. Well, now I'll know to look out for it and be sure to look for you guys. Well, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. Thank you for joining us this week. If you would like to support the Conversations on Dance podcast, there are a few ways that you can help. Click over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a review. Download episodes when you listen to allow our analytics to better understand our listenership. Join our Facebook group, Conversations on Dance, Friends of the Pod, or you can offer a donation. Conversations on Dance has always been and will always be free to our listeners. You can help us continue to create and produce this unique behind-the-curtain look at the dance world by visiting conversationsondancepod.com/support. Thank you for tuning in. See you next week.